In 1801, scientist Thomas Young conducted the first double-slit experiment that would go on to help us understand so much more about how our reality behaves. In this experiment, Young found that light acts as a wave, and as other scientists continued to refine this experiment, it was discovered that light behaves actually both as a wave and a particle. This also gave birth to what we call the observer effect. Now, why is this such a profound discovery, especially when it comes to your ability to create reality, is because it showed that you actually can have influence over your reality based on the way that you observe it. It revealed to us that reality is subject to influence, and the thing that can influence reality is a conscious observer, also known as you. Now, this experiment, the double slit experiment, and similar experiments have been done countless times now over the last 200 years, all yielding the same or similar results. And what I love about these discoveries and what the observer effect tells us is that we can literally start to change our lives and our reality by just starting to observe it differently. But here's the key. Observing reality doesn't just include observing it with your physical eyes. In fact, it mainly has to do with what you're observing from your inner eye and how you are observing from that. So this means your thoughts, the energy and feeling you're in most of the time, and the images you dwell upon in your mind. This is also a form of observation. You ultimately get what you focus on, you get more of what you assume to be true, and more on that later. So in the rest of this video, we are going to dive more into why reality is subject to influence, how you can start influencing yours so that you are creating what you want, and some tools that are going to help you use what were discovered in these experiments to create the life you want for yourself. So like I mentioned in the intro, the observer effect that reveals that you have influence over your reality is not necessarily talking about just observing something with your physical eyes. There are actually plenty more powerful causes that are at play here. You see, the main areas in which your observations have the most impact is through your mind and your imaging, and also through your feelings and your consciousness. See, throughout the day you are thinking, and you have to remember that we think in pictures, meaning you are observing certain images through your mind all day long that are activating the observer effect. This is why practices like intentional visualization is so incredibly powerful. It's also why you hear sayings all the time from success books and from successful people that you get what you think about most of the time. However, there's also something else we need to keep in mind as well, and that is the level of consciousness, vibration, and frequency you are observing and activating in your daily life. See, there was a brilliant researcher more recently named David Hawkins, whose life work consisted of exploring consciousness, and in his book Power versus Force, he created what is known as the Hawkins scale of consciousness. Now, through a method known as kinesiology, he was able to calculate the different levels of consciousness on this scale. In his lifetime, they actually did millions of calibrations and passed the scientific burden of proof with a 99.9% accuracy rate in his studies. Now, I'm going to have the Hawking scale come up on screen so I can explain what the implications of this are, and we'll get into how you can use the observer effect while using this or being aware of this to essentially improve your life, influence reality, and create it in the ways that you want. So understand that with this scale of consciousness, the higher up the scale you go, the more power you have to work with. Essentially, the more you can create. So we want to be, for the most part, dwelling in the higher levels of consciousness as far as this scale goes. Now, the lower on the scale of consciousness that you go, the less power, and the more what Hawkins calls force. So if you're lower on this scale, you're trying to essentially force things in your life. When you're higher on this scale and you're living more from the higher levels of consciousness, you are essentially using more power, more energy, higher levels of frequency to create in your life. So the big question is, what level of consciousness are you observing through? Essentially, which lens of consciousness are you observing the world around you and your inner world from? Because if you're observing it from a level of, say, anger, which is 150 on this scale, the results you're going to get are going to be much different than if you were observing it from the level of love, which is 500 on the scale. Now, one thing to understand about this scale is that the level of power between, let's say, 100, which is fear, and 200, which is courage, is actually a lot more than you may at first realize, because this scale is logarithmic, meaning that most, or actually all of these numbers are exponentially larger and have more power than the one previous. So when you're looking at the number 100, the difference between that and actually 101 is way more than you think. It is logarithmic. So the difference between anger, that example I gave, and let's say that's the consciousness we're in most of the time, that's the lens in which we're looking through, that's the way we're painting our reality through the lens of anger. And love, the difference between these two is massive. You wouldn't even be able to write it out on a chalkboard if you spent your whole life trying to write it out. The amount of power and energy you would gain access to, and the difference in what you would be able to create coming from anger versus love would be insanely radical. So ultimately, what level of consciousness are we observing from? And if we're observing from lower levels, we're going to get less of what we want in our lives. If we're observing from higher levels, life becomes more coherent, it becomes more smooth, it becomes more beautiful. In fact, there is another body of work from someone named Hans Jenny who came up with what's called cymatics, or I should say discovered cymatics. Now, you may be aware of cymatics. It's when people will pump certain vibrations, usually into sand or water. Dr. Iamoto's water experiments, for example, could be used as an example of this. But cymatics basically revealed that the higher level of consciousness or vibration that you were to put into something, the more it would beautify and become coherent and complex. Essentially, the higher the level of frequency that you observe in your life, the lens that you observe through in your life, the more beautiful and coherent and beautifully complex your life becomes. So this basically means that if we control our attention, so that we are focusing more from the higher levels of consciousness, the more our life is going to start to beautify. The more of what we want starts to come in. If we can focus more on what we do want versus what we don't want, we're going to receive more of that in beautiful ways in our lives. Again, we get what we think about most of the time. If your attention is thinking about things that operate more on those higher levels of consciousness, you will receive the physical equivalents of those things. Essentially, if you do that, you will receive more peace, more harmony, more abundance, more love, and the physical equivalent of those things, along with other higher levels of consciousness. Now, one of the things we actually do for our clients who go through our 6-month coaching program is help them keep their consciousness raised to the higher levels on this scale, and teach them how to do that on their own. And through doing this, seemingly magical results will start to appear in their life. Now, the thing is, it's not really magical. They're very natural results that start to appear when you start following a very specific system, and again, keep your consciousness raised to a certain level where you're living from that place. Now, if you're interested in joining one of our programs, our coaching programs, you can learn more about it through the first link in the description if you would like. Now, to give you another resource and body of work, which I think goes over this so well, is Tom Campbell, who's still alive doing this research and really making great strides when it comes to this. He's a great guy who's doing amazing work. He has a YouTube channel you can check out too. I did an interview with him a while back, but he says that the higher you raise your consciousness, the more you live from that place, the more you move towards love on that scale and even beyond, the more what's called your decision space starts to expand. Meaning that you suddenly have more options in your life. You suddenly have more coherence and beautiful complexity in your life. The lower you go on that scale, the more your decision space starts to close up, and you feel like you have less options in your life. And someone who is in fear or guilt or shame, and most of us have experienced that at some point, we feel like we have very limited options and things are closing up around us. We have less decision space. But the higher we go up on this consciousness scale, the more we see the abundance around us, the opportunities, and the more they start to come in as well. He also talks about how the higher on this scale you are, the lower entropy you will experience, and entropy simply means breakdown, and the lower you are on the scale, the higher your entropy, means faster breakdown. And if you think about it, someone who's in fear usually does age more quickly or break down more quickly because they're very stressed. The higher you go up, the more you're going to experience lower entropy, and sometimes even healing the higher you are up on this scale. Now, although the idea of controlling your attention in this way seems simple, it can be anything but easy, especially if you have no idea what you're doing. So now we're going to go over how you can start doing this yourself so that you can have a plan moving forward that can help you use the observer effect in a way that allows you to influence reality in the ways you want. Because again, this stuff, when you learn it, isn't necessarily the most complex stuff. A lot of these natural laws are. It's pretty simple. But applying them is a whole different game. Remember, knowing and not doing is the same as not knowing, and there's a big difference between information and transformation. You're going to have to step on the treadmill, not just hear about how the treadmill works. But let's go over how it works so you can actually step on with a little more awareness about what you need to do so that you can start getting the results. So what I'm going to do is give you a very powerful tool and analogy that we actually give our clients, and we help them dive very deep into this throughout the whole program, but I want to give you it here because it can be immediately useful to you and help you use what we've already been going over to start getting some changes in your life. This is one I come back to all of the time, not only for myself, but like I said, for my clients, and I recommend that you use it over and over again to your benefit. And this is what we call the art gallery metaphor and exercise. You see, the reason most people are struggling to create what they want in their life is because they're reacting to everything that's going on around them. You know, something little happens and they react with anger. What lens of consciousness are you now viewing or using the observer effect towards when you do that? That's right, anger. Or something else happens and they go into fear. What lens are you now observing through? The lens of fear. Or a lot of people are in guilt, shame, or whatever else because they're reacting to all these triggers around them that are causing them to feel this way. And so we need to have a way to cut that off or to get you to respond differently, ideally at least neutrally or at a higher level of consciousness. Think about when you're reacting to everything at being at effect to everything. And think about when you actually choose your response at being at cause to everything. You see, most people are living at effect. Something happens and they are living at effect to it, instead of creating their own causes. Very rare are the people who will have something happen, be neutral towards it, or just allow it to be, and then choose differently. And that is called being at effect. You are now intentionally and consciously choosing the lens you want to look through, which is going to create new effects in your life because you are activating a new cause. Most people have something happen, they react to it, they get hooked in, and now they are at effect to life. Life is happening to them instead of through them. And this kind of person is using the observer effect against themselves to create and influence reality in a more negative direction for them. You end up attracting more of those kind of events and opportunities and so on. And what's even more so, because you keep doing that, you are creating habits around doing that, which makes it even easier to attract those similar negative events into your life. Now, the upside is this can work in the other direction when you start to use this. And so instead of always reacting, you start responding consciously. And then suddenly you start creating different things in your life. And suddenly, as you keep doing that, you start creating new patterns and new habits, which make it more automatic. So here is the art gallery metaphor so that you can use it fully. So imagine that you are in an art gallery. And this is the art gallery of your life. So you're in the room and on the walls are paintings and artwork that all represent things that are in your life. Now the thing is, most people, or a lot of people, do not actually like the artwork that is in their art gallery, or they're in a room in the art gallery and always looking at these things they don't like. And so what most people try and do is they look at the art angrily. They send angry energy towards the art. Maybe they scream at the art. Maybe they do something similar where they're just scowling and staring it down. Some people may even try to alter the art or destroy the art. The problem is you have no right, like in a real art gallery, to destroy, alter, or do anything to the art. That will get you kicked right out of the art gallery, right? And so you have no right to change anything that is in your art gallery. But you have every right to choose something different. You see, if you keep looking at and staring at and being hooked in to the art you don't enjoy in your art gallery, you actually make it bigger. You make it more prominent. You're giving it more energy. And so you're looking at one painting you don't like and you're giving it all this negative energy, and then you come back into that room the next day and suddenly the painting is even bigger. However, let's say you're going through your life and you're in the art gallery and then something that would normally trigger you comes up and suddenly you're looking at this painting again that you don't like in your life. If you decide to not react, if you decide to remain calm, if you decide to not be reactionary and instead calmly neutrally observe the painting and then choose differently by looking at something else, you suddenly will no longer be feeding that artwork. It will suddenly no longer be able to play off of your energy or become expanded, and now you are switching your attention and using the observer effect towards something else. And so if you're in a room full of Picassos and you hate Picasso but you love Van Gogh, again, you can't go into the room with the Picassos and start tearing them down, drawing over them, or whatever else. But you absolutely can choose to instead go into the room filled with the Van Goghs. So the key thing to remember from this analogy is choose, don't change. Choose, don't change. When you learn this at more advanced levels, you recognize that everything in your life is actually an energetic history, something we dive really deep into the nitty-gritty with. Everything in your art gallery is just an energetic history, past energy that is accumulated or attracted into your life. You literally brought it in. And so if you're complaining or moaning at it or yelling at it, you're literally yelling at a history instead of activating new causes that will create a new history. So again, next time you find yourself reacting at some of the artwork in your life, take a step back, calm yourself, allow yourself to become the observer, recognize that you are the observer, that at every moment the observer effect is in effect in your life, and then choose differently. And by choosing differently and looking at different artwork, you are starting to make that more prominent in your life. By giving that your attention, it starts to expand into your life faster, while the other stuff starts to shrink and starts to become starved out, until eventually the art curator takes that off the walls and puts more of what you want on the wall. Now I'm going to give you one of the exercises we also give our clients in our EMF program, our 6-month coaching program with this. And what you're going to do is you're going to take an audit of what are the things in your life that you don't like. What is the artwork that you see on your walls that you don't like? And you're going to write everything down. And then from a scale of 1 to 10, you're going to rate how intense is that dislike. Like how much does it trigger you? Is it a 10, as in like immediately I get hooked and it's really bad? Or is it a 1 or closer to 1 where it's not so much, but maybe it's a 3 and you want to take note of it so it's in your awareness? And that's the key word there, awareness. Because when you become aware of these things, you're more likely to catch yourself when you're screaming at the artwork, which you've probably been doing unconsciously up until this point. But again, it doesn't matter if it's unconscious or conscious. The observer effect is still in effect, so if you're unconsciously yelling at some artwork, you are still using it in that direction, coloring your life through the lens of consciousness that you are directing towards whatever that thing is in your life. Like I mentioned earlier, knowing and not doing is the same as not knowing, so I highly recommend that when you're done this video or at some point today, you do this exercise. Just get a fresh sheet of paper out or in your journal and write out what artwork am I complaining at in my art gallery and write everything out, rate it from 1 to 10. And again, those who go through our EMF program, we do this at the very beginning, and it's quite magical to see them go back and recognize, wow, I'm not complaining about that artwork anymore. I forgot about this thing, it hasn't even come up. And of course, they're going through a system that allows them to do that and help, but you can still do this yourself by listing out what that is and seeing it improve as you start to apply certain things. And just remember, moving forward, choose, don't change. Choose, don't change. Now, there are many other tools and insights and ideas I could give you, but I want to give you one of the most powerful that, if used, really activates the observer effect in your favor. Essentially, we're going to identify an artwork you want to come in really fast in your physical life and get you to essentially look at it in a way that brings it about quickly. And I go over how to do that in this video, where I give you the full manifestation formula. Seriously, if you apply this to a T and you do the work and trust the process with it, you are going to start seeing results. It'll show you how to identify what your dream is, what to focus on, how to use the observer effect, and everything else. So I recommend going to look at that next.